Evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors. It's Wednesday, October 11th. We're here at the Freeport High School Library. Everyone's here except Lindsay. I think she's on her way. I haven't heard otherwise. Okay, good. So she'll be joining us shortly.
As we speak.
And there she is. Just stay standing because we're going to do the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, couple of housekeeping things. First of all, happy birthday, Dr. Foley. It's your birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending it with us. I know this is exactly how you wanted to spend your birthday.
Yes, I can't think of a better way.
I did hear rumor, though, that you've said it's okay to be here on your birthday because really October is your whole birthday month.
Yes, I celebrate the whole month.
I appreciate that.
I encourage all of you to do that. It works very well.
And the other thing I just wanted to mention, because I know board members have been interested in this in the past, and I apologize for the late notice, Friday, the 13th, this Friday at 10 a.m., leaving from the central office, Dennis is doing his whirlwind tour of all of the facilities in the district. So if you're able to do that, it's usually a couple of hours, right? And that's right. He talks about his capital plan a little bit. He's able to point out some of the items on there. I did a few years ago. I found it extremely helpful. I hadn't necessarily been to all the areas of all the schools. So if you can do that, great. They're leaving from the central office at 10 a.m. He usually has one of the vans to bring people around. So just try to get there a few minutes early. And if you'd like to attend, maybe just shoot Ginny and Dennis an email just so he knows how many people are coming, so he knows for transportation. Adjustments to the agenda? None. Public comment? We have a full crowd today, or relatively full. So we have two public comment sessions on our agenda, one here and one at the end of the meeting. So if anybody has anything interesting to say? Okay. So we'll move on to new business. Consideration and approval to enter into an MPA boys and girls ski cooperative agreement with Brunswick High School. Craig, I think you're up.
Good evening. How are you? Trying to warm up from standing on the cold sidelines this afternoon. It finally felt like fall. So I think you have a piece of paper that was handed out. I'll just go through that. I know there are some questions, but this may answer some of those. So for the last 3 years, we have done an MPA individual cooperative agreement, which means Brunswick's skiers have come and skied and practiced with our students and skied in our ski meets as Brunswick students. So when they race as a Brunswick student. They don't really have a team score because they only had one girl Alpine and 3 or 4 boys. So they really don't have a team score. Our coach is their coach. When we weren't in the same classification, Freeport would go to the state championships in Class B. Last year we were A, and I won't get into that. And they would go to theirs. So they would have to find their own coach for the state championship. So we're suggesting that for 17-18 we enter into an MPA team cooperative. So what that means is they're no longer individuals, that this would now be very similar to ice hockey. We have a South Portland / Freeport / Waynfleet boys ice hockey team, and that's how it appears in the newspapers. And our girls have a Waynfleet / Freeport / Greater Gloucester ice hockey co-op, and that is the name of the team, and that's what appears on MPA forms and in the newspapers. Their skiers would now score. So if they have the best skier and their skier comes in number 1, our skier comes in number 1 because it's one team. We would now be one team. We would be known as Freeport / Brunswick. Their stipulation is that if the co-op is still around and you buy new uniforms, that both schools have to be incorporated into the uniform somehow. South Portland Ice Hockey just bought brand new ice hockey uniforms. They're still red and white, South Portland's colors, but in their round logo on the outside, they have Freeport, South Portland, and Waynfleet. So if new uniforms are purchased during the co-op period, one of the stipulations is that somehow both teams have to be figured into that, or 3 teams. This last year, actually, this upcoming year, based on skiers who skied last year, our Alpine team, girls, will have 3. A scoring team is 4. So we don't have a scoring team with just the Freeport kids. We have 16 boys. Brunswick will have 6 total Alpine skiers, plus or minus. This last year, based on what Brunswick had last year, they'll have 4. He thinks there might be 1 or 2 more. Last year, Brunswick had 1 Alpine. He thinks there might be 1 or 2 more. So we're looking at a total of maybe 6 boys, definitely 4, maybe 2 girls, definitely 1. So why do we want to be a team and not just individuals? Well, one, the girls, it helps us have a scoring team. Skiing is unlike any other sport. Skiing, you always go to a state championship. All the other sports you have to win, you got to qualify, you got to get heel points, you got to go to regionals, the top 10 schools at regionals, but in skiing everybody goes, so you know from the get-go that you're going to participate in a state championship ski meet. So to know that we have a scoring team going in helps. This really shouldn't be part of the decision-making process, but the parents are very excited that the state championship because when we do this with Alpine, we've been Class B forever. This last 2 years, because of our enrollment, we went to Class A in Alpine. Well, we're back to Class B. If we do this co-op with Brunswick, we would go back to A. And one of the reasons many of the parents like it is because the Class A state championship is at Mount Abram as opposed to Big Rock in Aroostook County. You know, you laugh, but that's huge. I mean, that's a lot of travel. It's very expensive. And as far as competitiveness, you know, our coach Jay Harper's here. If you'd like to ask him some questions, but it really doesn't matter whether it's A or B. There's good teams in both. You know, I might argue that some of the better teams might be in B because they're smaller schools and they're located near the mountains up in the mountains. So when you're skiing against a lot of the A schools who are down here in southern Maine, they don't have access to the mountains like some of those smaller schools do. And I think it just helps with unity. They train all year long, they ski all year long, and then when it comes to the big races, whoops, sorry, you're not a part of our team anymore. So I just think it helps that whole team cohesiveness. It's a 2-year agreement based on the MPA policy. This is the first year of a reclassification cycle. So for 2 years, we are where we are, and it coincides with the co-op. So this would be a 2-year agreement. The Alpine folks definitely want to go team for the reasons I just said. The Nordic coach would like to remain in Class B, and then there's a number of reasons why. One, the state championship, although it's in Aroostook County, the state championship site in Aroostook County is probably the best site in all of New England for a Nordic meet. I mean, that's where the world-class Olympics train, and they hold their world-class cup meets up there, and it's just an outstanding facility. So while it is in Aroostook County, going to that type of facility and that type of organization and that type of arrangement is just an experience that you can't get anywhere else. The math is really close with the Nordic. If they just have one skier, and we really haven't eyeballed the math of this really close for Nordic yet. We know the Alpine, if we do this, will go from B to A. The parents are excited about that. The coach, as far as competition, it's kind of a wash. B, the way the new MPA cooperative team policy is, you just don't add the 2 enrollments now. And I'm going to use simple math. if there's 10 total kids on the Alpine ski team, prior, if Brunswick only had one, we would use their 800 and our 5, and you'd get 1,200. Now, if we have 10 kids in our ski team and Brunswick has one, then we take 1/10 of Brunswick's enrollment, add it to ours because we're the host, and then add that 1/10 now puts us wherever it is. Well, with the number of skiers we have, and last year's just one Nordic skier puts us one number below the cutoff. So we would have to look at that number very closely, and they would have to eyeball their folks. He's put out some feelers. I mean, it's October. To try to get a handle on who's going to ski is kind of hard. So before we do the MPA forms, we would have to get more clearer numbers from Brunswick, do the math on the MPA form, and if it puts us into Class A, then we would just continue on the Nordic side with the individual co-op as we have for the last 3 years. I guess I'll stop there. I know you have a bunch of questions. I have those written down here. So why don't I just go over that right now? So Valley wrote a couple of questions. Is there a financial benefit from moving to individual to a team? And there really isn't. Last year, the Brunswick kids paid for their own cost. So the Alpine kids paid $385 a piece. That covers the cost of all of the tickets, whether it's training, race, the state ski meet, and a percentage for miscellaneous, which is wax, etc. If you think about $385 when they practice 2 or 3 days a week, compared to the $500 that we pay, or our students pay to swim at Yarmouth, or the $750 that our ice hockey kids pay, that we're now covering in our budget. But comparative wise, it's pretty comparable. The ice hockey's every day for $750. We're doing $385 for 2 times a week. So I think that's pretty comparative. The Nordic cost to the Brunswick kids were $100. That was a $45 training pass to Pineland Farms and the Nordic race fees, and again, some percentage for miscellaneous. So as far as the financial benefit, there's no benefit I see to us. We did not charge them for travel. We did not charge them for the coach. Those are expenses we have to have whether we're with Brunswick or we're not with Brunswick. Is there a problem we're trying to solve? Not really. There's no problem, although it does solve the problem of not having a girls' full team to score at state championship meet. I've already gone over the number of kids. The duration is 2 years. How would decisions be made regarding coaching, training, funding, boosters, money rates, lodging? Exactly the same way we always have done that. The coach is in charge of who skis, who races first, who races fifth. We do ask that the parents get involved in our boosters, similar to the way South Portland and Yarmouth want our parents to get involved with their boosters. And I think for the most part, the parents have, and our parents have, and their parents have. Transportation, so they would still have to, the transportation, they're still responsible for their transportation getting to our school to ride our bus. We're not going to go and get them and then go to the mountain. They're going to get here, get on our bus, and then we're going to go. And that's no change. That's the way it's been for 3 years. The name of the co-op, competitive. I think I've answered all of Valley's questions. Maybe not. Does anybody else have any questions?
Lindsay.
Why now? Like, why is this coming up now? Why haven't we done this in the past? What's inciting this?
Well, I think for 3 years we've gone through, and at the end of the year it's kind of anticlimactic because we get to the big races and they're not. It's like, oh, they're not with us anymore. And I think it helps the team cohesiveness. It helps bond. It's kind of hard to go through a whole season of practicing and participating in meets and games to come to the tournament, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 of your players aren't there anymore. Whatever sport it is, that would be a hard thing to do. Whether they're a starter or they're a sub, all of a sudden they're not allowed to participate. So they can't ski at our Western Maine Conference Championship meet either. So they can ski in our Western Maine Conference regular season meets, but when it comes to the championship meet, they cannot. So there's a meet, we lose them, and then of course the state championship meet. I just think it makes sense to have to be a team, a real team, and not this kind of a split thing. And again, it helps our girls come up with a scoring team.
Valley.
So Greg, in skiing is not unusual for someone to start and not finish. So if you have 4 girls, which is the minimum number required, are they all 4 required to finish to be able to qualify as a team at states? Or if one doesn't finish, then you're back to square one and you're not qualifying, not competing?
The expert.
Jay Thomas here. So yes, everyone needs to finish to get a scoring team. There are some events, typically our weekly races, where they'll go, and if we have 3 finish, they'll give us the last time of the last skier that qualified. Like, say we're racing 40 kids, they'll get the 40th person. They call it a ghost time. So there are times when we can actually still get a team score.
But would that be the case at states?
I'm not exact. I don't think we use that at states.
Okay.
But, typically, most of our kids, they're coached to finish. If you fall down, you get back up, unless you can't get back up. And actually, a lot of our kids, too, that we're not like the fastest kids on the hill, and oftentimes, it's the fast ones that blow out of the course and skid off into the woods and disappear, and it just doesn't make any sense to get up because they can't or they've lost things. But most of the kids that are a little bit slower, they finish. So, it's all good.
Slow and steady wins the race is what I just heard. Finish it, right. At least you finished the race, that's right.
Does that answer your question?
So follow-up comment to that. I mean, the way I look at this agreement, having the team co-op instead of the individual co-op, is really to solve the girls' problem that they can't score at states. I mean, I happen to have a kid in that team, and team spirit and practicing and training, all that is smooth, works great. I don't think I've ever heard any complaints about the kids not meshing well, because the Brunswick kids can compete in the States. So I have a couple of comments. One, I don't see how this really truly addresses the issue of the girls not being a scoring team, because so often you do have one who doesn't finish or one who doesn't start, and you're cutting it really close. I mean, you're just at 4. And if everything goes well, then you have your goal achieved, but very likely that may not happen. And I'm concerned also about just what will happen to the Freeport boys who may have to cede spots to the Brunswick kids at states. And I know that is the goal for a lot of the skiers, to be able to compete in states. So if you're adding boys to the team and displacing some of the Freeport boys to try to have a scoring team for the girls, which you may not get in the end, I'm not sure this is really the solution to the problem.
So those are the exact same comments that our ice hockey people heard from South Portland and Waynfleet, because we have 2 or 3 boys that see quite a considerable amount of time on our co-op ice hockey team. And actually, the leading scorer on the girls ice hockey team in Freeport for their career is a Freeport kid. So those are real concerns. And I think that once they're there and parents are involved in boosters and the kids are out on the floor, on the ski hill, on the ice, I think it's we do what's best for kids, not just our kids, but all kids. And I think this gives us an opportunity to give to others like others have given to us. I mean, our ice hockey kids would not have an opportunity to skate if it weren't for someone giving us an opportunity. Our swimmers would not have an opportunity to swim if it wasn't for others providing that opportunity. With swimming, it would be easier because that's an individual sport, but certainly not ice hockey. And while Brunswick can still do it, without us. I just think it's an opportunity for us to give back to what we've received at times.
I mean, I share that sentiment that we want to share and include everyone. However, for ice hockey, it's different. I mean, they wouldn't be able to field their own team without having skaters from other districts.
That's not true today.
But now you're already in it. They wouldn't offer that cooperative team if you wanted to join in today. So I don't see them as equal sports with the same requirements for the kids to be able to compete. At the point when that agreement came together, none of these kids in the districts that are now the co-op would have been able to compete. So there was a real need for all of these districts to come together. And we're not displacing the Brunswick kids. They're still training with us. They're still skiing with us. They're still competing and participating. It's just at states they wouldn't ski as a team. I don't know. I'm just not convinced. And I also see that the boosters' money, how is that going to be shared? I mean, we need to buy uniforms for all the kids, Brunswick kids included. And how many Brunswick parents are going to actually make the trek from Brunswick on a weekday evening to help out? I'm not sure. I don't have the experience, but I do have questions.
Kate.
So Valley's bringing up points that I'm feeling a little bit out of place with because I don't really understand how ski teams and individuals, how they compete. So I was wondering if you could just explain a little bit to me, with the individual cooperative agreement, do we not compete as a team still?
Yep, we will be one team.
How do we compete now without, if we
So-
weren't to approve this and we went on with how they've been doing it the last 3 years,
Right, so
we
if we
still have a team competition?
Yep, so if we continue as the individual cooperative agreement, their kids come and practice with us. Our coach is their coach. They are Brunswick skiers. There's Freeport skiers and there's Brunswick skiers. And when we go to a ski meet, the Freeport kids score as a team, Brunswick kids score as a team. When we go to the Western Maine Conference Championship, Brunswick can't come. And when we go to the state championship, they have to go to their own championship, whether it's our class or not. If we do it as a team co-op, we are one pool of bodies. We're not two separate pools, we're one pool. So all of those kids score and race as one team. And our team is Freeport/Brunswick. So if the Freeport kid comes in first and the Brunswick kid comes in second, we have come in first and second. So it's not Freeport and Brunswick, it's Freeport/Brunswick. When we go to the state championship, we have to select 5 alpine skiers and 5 Nordic skiers. And typically we select the 5 best based on the results over the season. So
that's the potential seats that could be lost to Freeport kids to Brunswick, right?
Correct.
So if we can only bring so many.
Actually,
You bring alternates too, right?
right, I can go and speak to that too. If all of a sudden we had a bunch of kids we wanted to bring to this race, and I've done this before, typically the idea is to win the race. And so I would bring a team, and the girls' team, I don't bring a full team. So everybody gets to race every race. I could potentially race 12 people, because actually, Craig was saying 5. I have 6, plus alternates. But I could go and put 6 names down for the slalom and 6 names down for the GS, and then I could even bring some alternates. So we can really bring the whole gang. Typically, we don't like to do that, because we like to focus on our best kids. And we're trying to win a championship here, bring home some hardware. But there's many years where I've actually gone and I race my 4 fastest kids, and then I might mix up the last 2. So I could have an additional 4 kids come as well. So that's the way we play that game. So we have more kids included in it.
And also, Jay, I mean, back when Freeport had a lot of skiers, that's what we used to do as well, right?
Yes.
I mean, there were some Freeport kids that couldn't race because they
Right.
weren't.
Often, in the last few years, the only kids that really I stayed away from bringing to states was freshmen if they weren't up to it. We've had years where we were just we would have these larger teams, and that's another reason why we want to do this now is because our teams are smaller. I don't have my coat on, but there were years where our girls were winning state championships, and we had like this amazing girls team. And right now we're down to, a couple years ago I was begging 2 girls to ski. We had 1 girl at one point. So I think we're trying to get our numbers up there. And our boys' numbers are actually down some too. We've often skied with a lot more kids. So bringing Brunswick on gives us some more numbers. With bigger numbers, your odds are better having kids. And you also have to make it through the whole season. And for juniors last year that I lost, we lost a kid in training at the States. So it's nice to have some, it's good to have some numbers.
Naomi.
Did you say this would be a 2-year agreement, and then we could reevaluate if people don't like it, parents don't like it, it's not working?
Right. The MPA agreement is for 2 years. So if we wanted to do it, we would have to go through this process again in 2 years.
Lindsay.
Craig, you mentioned that parents were supportive. I mean, it's not that many parents to ask, it sounds like. I mean, is every parent supportive, or you think a majority are supportive, or?
The parents that I have spoken to that reached out to me are in favor. This is the first one I've heard that. I think she's not, but that's the first one that I've heard.
Well, how many have you heard from? 2 or 19, or somewhere in between?
Well, the booster president, they had a booster meeting, and they said the boosters are in favor. So I can't tell you how many boosters were at that meeting, or how many the numbers that are.
Okay.
So, Craig, what is the precedent for these kinds of agreements once they're over? Is there an expectation from the other team that we will continue because now we are a team? How easy is it to go back to the individual co-op if the main goal is to build up the team? Once you get to build that team, how easy is it to say, well, thank you so much, now we have our own team and we have the numbers we need?
Well, in 2 years, I have to come back to this group to do it again or not. If we're not going to do it again, then I don't have to come back, and we'll just do the individual. So if I come back in 2 years, how easy is it not to do it? I make a motion that we do not enter into this, and I second, and I vote, and we don't do it.
No, I mean in terms of hurting feelings from the Brunswick families.
I think it's a 2-year agreement, and things change. We were worried that once South Portland's numbers are up and they didn't need us anymore, that they wouldn't want us. Well, their numbers are up. They don't need us anymore, but we're still there. So, and I think that can change. If their numbers continue to grow, that certainly can change. We're at the whim of the host. And if South Portland says we don't want you anymore, I totally understand that, and we'll be disappointed and we'll look to go somewhere else. But I think as the host school, we get to call the shots, and if we don't want to continue it, then we don't continue it. If it's not good for our kids, it's not good for our kids. If it's not working, it's not working. But I think for 3 years it has worked, and I think this is just the next step to making it work or keeping it working.
Okay.
Jeremy.
Just from what I understand about co-op sports, it sort of is the next thing in Maine, and it's growing and more just because the populations are shrinking, not here, but it seems like every other district. And I would just hate to set a precedence where we're like somehow upsetting Brunswick, upsetting a team nearby when we might need to send kids that way in the future too. So I don't want to create hard feelings, and it seems like it's a win-win for our girls especially to be able to have a team. So. Well,
this new policy really is going to open doors, because if this new policy had been around 6 years ago, our boys would be skating with Yarmouth right now. Because one of the big reasons Yarmouth didn't want our boys is they would go from B to A, and that changes all of their traditional rivals. It changes their schedule, and I understand that. But using the formula now, and again, I'm kind of guessing, but I don't think our 4 boys would, and that percentage would now bump them up. But it's going to open doors for more sports. Football's the next one that's going to come, because there are a lot of schools that don't have the kids for that.
Valley can first. Kate.
I just need to understand a little bit better what happens at the championship. There is there are only 5 slots, but you can bring. There are 6 slots, but you can bring
two
more
alternates.
people. You can bring alternates.
In case someone gets hurt or sick.
And there's more than one event, so you could have
there's
6 in 2 different events. Right?
Correct. So there's 6 kids from the Alpine event, 6 kids for the slalom, 6 kids for the giant slalom. Those could be the same 6. Typically, it's not. Typically, your top 3 are your top 3 in both.
Yeah.
And then the other 3 are mix and match. One kid might be better in Alpine, might be better in slalom, so he's on the slalom only, and you might have another kid who's better in giant slalom, and he's on the giant slalom only, and then you have alternates. And last year, we had a kid get hurt in a training run the day before the state championship. So it's nice to have that, another kid to plug in. Someone might get sick, come down sick, and may not even be able to go.
But typically, it's quite expensive to bring kids to states. So we generally and historically haven't brought a lot of kids. We bring the best kids, and there is a lot of overlap. So you do find, like Greg said, that the best skier in slalom is the 3rd best in GS or something along those lines. So you don't generally double your numbers by having 2 skiers for GS, and 6 for GS and 6 for slalom, and then 2 alternates for each. Usually the numbers are pretty small because Boosters covers a lot of the cost, and Boosters doesn't have that much money.
So it's the coach's decision who are those 6 and who are the alternates. And there have been years when those 6 slots and the 2 alternate slots have been 10 kids. There are years when those 6 slots and 2 alternate slots have been 12 kids. And as far as the boosters raise the money. We charge whoever is selected to go to the state meet for the last couple of years. They've also had to pay $100 from the family. We charge the families $100. The rest of it, of 3 nights, room and board, and is picked up by the boosters.
Yeah.
And I just want to echo what Jeremy said, that I see this as something that long-term could even end up being beneficial for us if our numbers continue to dwindle, that we might come to need Brunswick to compete in team level competitions, if I'm understanding this right. So I'm in favor of supporting it.
Well, yep.
Is it possible to do the co-op team just for the girls and not for the boys, so that you address the need that the girls have by having a targeted solution to your problem?
The answer to that is yes, but then that would split our team up for state championship. Our boys would be going in one direction and the girls would be going in the other direction, because the girls, if you only have 4 and one of them is from Brunswick, then we're going to take 25% of Brunswick's kids, and that will
That's interesting.
could be a different number than the boys. I mean, it might. I'm not math. I got to see it. So it could split them up for the state championship, but I guess I'd have to see the math first.
It also seems like the issue of the Brunswick kids having no coach for their states, because we have one coach and we split the team in half and send them in 2 different directions.
Right. So what we've said to them in the past is you're on your own for the state championship, and so they have to go through the MPA coaching requirements, and then someone's got to apply health, first aid, CPR, all the concussion videos, and so in which they've done.
Any other questions?
Just one more 2 cents on the whole thing. Yes, the state championship is the big race of the year. We also have 6 other races that everybody gets to race in. So there's a lot of racing that goes on. So they have a chance to get timed, scored, part of a team. It's just that final championship is where we have to limit the numbers. So it's not, I don't think we're pushing the Freeport kids totally out or some of them. They're not getting totally displaced. It's just, it's going to be on this big race. And again, depends on the numbers. If I had to go and include the Brunswick kids in my race roster from last year, there'd probably only be one Brunswick kid going. Would have only displaced one Freeport kid. I don't know what's going to happen this year. Again, it's all up in the air. We could all of a sudden have a girls team. We're thinking right now it's 4, could be 6. I've had a couple of the girls come to me that might be interested. Whether, a month and a half from now when the snow starts flying, will they still be interested and it starts getting cold and you have to stand on the side of the mountain and freeze? That kind of cuts them back, and indoor track looks pretty good. But anyway, so the kids get to race. It's not like we're going to boot Freeport kids out, because there's lots of races to be had.
Great, thank you. Everybody good with the question? So,
One final comment.
yeah.
So I'm going to vote for this, but I just want to be upfront that parents were not really informed about this change in the agreement. So it would be great if we could include in the discussion an assumption about what parents think about an agreement of this type when it hasn't really truly been discussed.
So on that point, I will say, this was not my idea. This came to me from the boosters and the coach. So it wasn't me putting this idea out. It was them coming to me and saying, hey, let's do this next year. Now, they is the boosters. I don't know who's in the boosters. I wasn't at the meeting. I don't know if the boosters is 4 or 8 or 14. I have no idea.
Well, given the cost for states, hopefully it's the higher number. Okay, so we need a motion for consideration and approval to enter into the MPA Boys and Girls Ski Cooperative Agreement with Brunswick High School. Naomi, second. John? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Cooperative. Right, because we already have a cooperative agreement, right? Okay, so next in the workshop session, we are starting with a pre-K presentation. Are you dropping this thing behind us?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to move.
So awesome to have help. Thank you. While we're waiting for that to come down, I just want to take a moment to introduce our pre-K teachers. They're all here this evening. We have Stephanie Merrill, who is the pre-K teacher in Durham. Next to her is Sarah Mason, and she's teaching at Pownell Elementary and at Moore Street, and Becky Billings at Moore Street. So welcome, and you'll be hearing from them in midway through the presentation. And you have this in your packet as well. Do, 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 do. Here it comes.
Should be good.
Okay, thank you.
No.
So I just want that picture of the student to clear. These the pictures that are included are all students that are currently in our pre-K program across the district and have approval to be in the slideshow this evening. Okay, it's not going. Trevor! Here he comes. There, you can see her clearly now. I'm not sure why it's not.
Let's try.
Okay, so just click here instead.
Yeah, try
okay.
that. Yeah. Should
So
be good now.
they're good now. Okay. My arrows were not working, but now they are. Perfect. Okay, so this is the historical look of our pre-K. I think this student is from Durham. Yep, yep. So in the three different schools, we began. Durham is the newest program. We almost lost my laptop. Durham is the newest program and began in 2015, and our current enrollment is 32. And then in Freeport, BC stands for Before Consolidation. And we currently have 47 enrolled. And then in Pownell, we are full at 16 enrollment. And those are all full days. And so, oops, I'm going to slide this here. So what does the research say? So if you remember, we all agreed, I think we talked to you last year about the importance that our administrative team has really put on early intervention. We did a lot of work and had a lot of discussion around that, and we felt that the best way to move our data is to really focus on early intervention, which includes preschool or pre-kindergarten and some tier 2 supports. So this piece of research talks about the importance of reading proficiency, in that, you know, if they have proficiency by the time they're at the end of 3rd grade, they are more likely to be successful. So this research here talks about 75% of poor readers at the end of 3rd grade will likely be poor readers in high school, and they are at risk not to graduate if they're not on grade level by the end of 3rd grade. And this is another report, the PICUS report. So Lawrence Pikus and Alan Oden worked together, and Lawrence is a professor of education, finance, and policy, and he's done research on the adequacy and equity of school finance. And Alan is the director of strategic management and human capital in public education. And so they have worked with schools and done reports for different states, and they work with the finance of at the state level, and they give they look at their financial like EPS, you know, funding formulas, and they make recommendations to states. So their research also includes some information on pre-K, and they are citing other researchers that say that they perform better. If you have pre-K, they perform better academically, they're more likely to attend college at a greater rate, and they engage in less socially undesirable behavior. So they're using other research in their research. The next part is the reading proficiency data. So this data is pulled for the last 3 years. So if we have in 2013, that cohort that is now a grade 3 that attended pre-K. So if you look across, you'll see that the current grade level is in grade 3. And the proficiency measure that was used is the Fontes and Pinnell that we assess all of the kids on. At the end of their 2nd grade year, they should be at a level M or N. And that's what we're using for that data. So if you look at the 4th column over where it says RSU 5 pre-K, 55% of that cohort that attended pre-K in our district are proficient right now. The other student column is either students that were somewhere else and they may have attended pre-K in another district and then moved in, or they didn't receive pre-K here and they were part of our district. And then the last column is the total number of students that are proficient. They're now at the beginning of 3rd grade. At the end of last year, they were proficient by what we use as our guide, as M or N. And so if you follow down, those are the current 2nd grade, and then the 1st grade students. So. You can see that, you know, we're going to continue to focus on early intervention, and we're hoping that these numbers are going to go up. And you're going to see at the end of the slide some of the things that we're going to do for next steps to improve this.
Can I ask a question on that?
Mm-hmm.
That 1st grade column there, or row there,
Yes.
seems strange to me. So
Tell me what's strange about it.
okay, so tell me if I'm reading it correctly. So 40%. So the kids who were in pre-K last year in the district, 40% of those were proficient. 60% of the kids who were not in our pre-K program last year were proficient. So that tells me you were better off not to have gone through our pre-K program.
So we don't know out of that 60% if some of those kids moved in and went to another pre-K.
Right, so it doesn't mean they didn't go to pre-K.
It does not.
Right. Like, because my
they didn't
kid
go
goes
to
to
our
pre-K, went to pre-K but not here.
Right.
And she's in that third grade, so she would be in that other bucket, right?
Right, correct. Yep, and so that's just the data we have now. That was the data I was able to pull. So, and if you look at, and if you,
I mean, it looks concerning to me.
it's a
but-
starting data point that we'll continue to look at, for sure. And if you look at the third grade cohort, remember that's about 33 kids that were in pre-K. Now we're talking about 59 kids. Well, you'll see that on a later slide. So it's a higher enrollment. So there are different numbers that make up. Actually, it's so that in the first cohort, 2013, that's 17 out of 31 students, makes up that 55%. And then in the second grade, I'm looking down the column there, the RSU 5 pre-K. So that 59%, 19 out of the 32 were proficient. And then in the grade 1, it's 22 out of the 55. So when you do the math, 22 out of the 55 that went to pre-K, it equals 40%.
And I think these would be kids that attended pre-K 2 years ago. They're currently in first grade.
Right. So it wasn't last year, it was the year before. So there's a lot more that goes into it, and you'll see that when I get to the next slide. It's not just about what happens in pre-K, it's also what happens, it continues to happen, and how systemic we are about the things that are happening as well. So this is our beginning data that we'll take a look at, and we'll continue to look at that more.
I like the third grade.
So this is our enrollment since we became an RSU 5. So you can see in 2009-10 there were 29 students, and this year we have 95. And the comments over to the right for this year, you'll see that we've expanded the program at Moore Street. That's why we have a jump in the numbers. And then 2 years prior is when we began the program in Durham. Hi. So let's check on the latest, because we did at one point, and I'm not sure we do any more. No.
I have an open spot at Moore Street, but I do have 2 families on the wait list because they specifically want Tuesdays and Thursdays.
That's right.
And our opening is Mondays and Wednesdays.
Yeah.
And I have 1 on the wait list. But they won't count on.
Yeah. They've actually, yes, so those conversations have happened. We try to give them another slot if they can. So, yeah. Okay. A principal's perspective. So Will has volunteered. We did have a picture of him up here, but he says, I'm in person, why do they need a picture of me? So he has...
for the benefit of everybody. I also would like to, without going all the way backwards to skiing, I would contradict Jay's perspective that slow skiers don't fall over, because I have personal experience that is in direct opposite to his statement.
He's gone.
So, and you know, believe me, when we were looking at these slides and we saw that reading data, we had all the same questions that you had. And there's all sorts of factors involved, but really the perspective on it is universal, which is this is going to be baseline, and you know we fully anticipate seeing that change. So you already heard that the pre-K has existed in Pound and Freeport prior to our most recent iteration. It started in Durham a couple of years ago. We have already started to see benefits from that as we move along, but also just some factors that we hadn't necessarily anticipated. So this year, across the district, we'll have the same model now, and which already holds great opportunity for our teaching team. They're starting to be able to meet together and work together and really look at some universal expectations for the students. So, you know, big focus is around these early learning foundational skills. The state has really very thorough Maine early learning and development standards. They are more specific than almost, I would say than any other grade level. Their expectations in terms of specificity are more detailed for pre-K than for anywhere else. So they are very invested in, as this sort of wave continues to sort of spread across Maine, that there's some real expectations that balance the developmental needs of young children and their opportunity for sort of play and creative learning, along with what are solid core skills that will really help them moving forward academically. So it's interesting to see how thought out that process is for pre-K. Another facet of the work that has been interesting for us is that the child find process can occur a year earlier and than it currently does with kindergarten. And the difference there is that the children are still, those who may need some extra support, are still eligible for child development services support, which is a different accessibility level than special education. So there can be sometimes some quicker intervention accessed for children who might need the extra support. And within our 3 programs, within our district program, we run a third day opportunity in Freeport and in Durham for students who might need that extra support. So everybody else predominantly gets 2 full days, and some students who need extra support will have 3 full days. And then the ability to sort of develop school norms and routines which help maximize kindergarten the following year. And in the same way that you know, if you ever had children in a looping classroom where they sort of come right back in and get straight away started, the fall for kindergarten now is very different from what it was. I mean, the children know how to ride the bus, they know how to go to the lunchroom, they know the expectations of the school, the teachers of the school, so it really allows us to focus in right away in kindergarten with getting more involved with the learning. So we have about 75% of potential students enrolled in pre-K. So our current kindergarten that came in, for example, about 75% of them attended the pre-K. So although not all the children have those norms, it's because the majority do, we find that the class moves along much quicker, and sort of mentors and role models and the other children will help each other in following along with those particular norms. So, and it does take the children a little while. I found I'm outside the school each morning and afternoon as buses arrive or depart. When I was in Stephanie's classroom yesterday, I think, one of the little boys looked up and said, what are you doing here? And the little boy working next to him said, I've seen him, I know him. And there's another third boy said, he's the guy who stands outside. So I think they just think I loiter around all day. So I wonder what he does when we're in school. But so it takes a little longer to get to know all names and roles, but luckily, 10 years from now, hopefully they'll have it figured out. So Stephanie, you're going to start by showing a little bit from the teacher's perspective.
One click, great. There's their pictures right up there. As Cynthia said earlier, I'm Stephanie Merrill. It's nice to see you all. I usually watch you on TV, so this is like real life right here. Because I do live in Durham and I watch the station. I've been teaching pre-K for the past 3 years. And I've seen huge growth in our program. We've had some, growing pains, I'd say, figuring out curriculum alignment, routines, and the best way to, the best use of our time. But now our model is, it just seems to work. The 2-day program with that 3rd day just seems to really work. Children who come to our pre-K, we've noticed, have stronger foundational skills. Starting kindergarten, the curriculum building blocks to kindergarten, as we use the same programs. They know the language of the handwriting without tears. We use the everyday math, it's spirals. We use the Fontes and Pinnell. They're sponges at this age, and once we plant that seed in kindergarten, they make huge gains from already doing that. Our extra session, as Will said, on Fridays has been working really well for those kids that need some support. And this year,
it's pretty cool. We get to work together. I get to work with Sarah and with Becky and Matt Halpern for PLC. So we travel back and forth. We'll switch to different buildings. So that's really exciting. We've never had that opportunity to collaborate. So that's really cool. And so overall, you know, I've seen a huge improvement in our program, and I'm really excited to be working with Freeport and Pownell as they adapt this new model. As you know, this is all new to them too, so thank you. Did anybody else have?
Don't run each other over trying to
Hello, I'm Sarah Mason, and I just want to add that I taught second grade for the last 4 years, and it's kind of nice to know where I need to get them to and then thinking backwards. So just I know those expectations of where they need to be. I'm familiar with all that curriculum, the teacher's college, and just, you know, the language they use and how we can already be practicing. Put a thumbs up if you agree with this instead of just all blurting out. So just I have really enjoyed seeing that full scope of pre-K to second grade and that whole early childhood range, and just how we can get our kids where they need to be by second, third grade, where those reading skills are really hopefully instilled into the kids. So yeah, that's all I have to really add to Stephanie. She covered it.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, now I feel like I've got to get out.
Now, I do think I have an idea about the number in first grade. This is the first year that we have had the pre-K program in Freeport be not a strictly inclusion program. It was a 50-50 program up until this year. So we certainly do have children with IEPs and with special ed issues in the classroom, but it's no longer, you can't have more than half children be typically developing. So I think that might be part of the number glitch. Because does that make sense? Okay. I mean, I don't know for sure, but that's just the thought. So I have been doing this a really long time. And this evolution in the, I'm sorry, what?
No, it's just, I'm saying potentially 2017 years. He
said BC.
This is my 38th year in Freeport, 38. Even though I could have given birth to my partner teachers. Anyway, this is my 38th year here. Yes. 38th year here, and the first couple of years I was strictly speech pathologist. And then when we got the classroom at Moore Street School, then it became a classroom-based program. And it has evolved from being a special purpose program only to being an inclusion program, and now to being this model of pre-K, which is really has a lot of really good, I think it really is the best job in the world. And it has evolved, and it's really it's a great place to be. So anyway, and we hope the kids think so too.
That slide really bothers me, so can I just, not that slide. the one that you guys were all talking about. I just want to tell you that last week I was at PLC with kindergarten. Sure, move back up there. So the people who are watching you at home. Okay, so last week, I just want to give it a positive, that's why. Last week I was in PLC with kindergarten, and they were going over data of letter sounds and identification of capital and lowercase letters. All of the children that I had last year, well, I should say 30 of those children knew every single one, and 2 of them that were recommended for Jump Start were in the other. It was just really good. I was just trying to give it a positive right now because it really, pre-K really does make a huge difference. And we'll see that data again, and it'll be better.
Thank you, Stephanie. You're welcome. Thank you, all of you. So for the cost analysis page, if you take a look at the second column, the costs, those costs are the salaries and benefits of the teachers that are sitting here and the ed techs, because we are required to have ed techs in each of the rooms. So that's what primarily what the costs and salaries and benefits column is about. And And then the subsidy, which is the far right, if you look at that column, that's what we get from the state, and it's based on the prior year's enrollment. So that's why you see that arrow. See where it says 122,000? That's based on the 66 from the prior year's enrollment. And we get that dispersed monthly throughout the year for this year. So that's the current amount we're getting. And it's not, they look at the enrollment, and it's not like a straight formula. It's not like, oh, you get so many dollars per. There are categories that they use for the calculations. And the current state calculated per pupil rate for K-8 is $6,929. That's not on your sheet. And then we get an extra 10% bump for each of those kids, so you add that to it. And then you get 25% of that, roughly. So it's actually 25.42% this year. In other years, it's a different percentage, but it's roughly hovers around 25 currently. And you remember last year, our overall subsidy last year was less than it was for the year before, and then when we got more money back, we ended up giving it back. So that's why you'll see that that one is lower than the one or the preceding year. So I just wanted to kind of explain how that worked. So that's how the cost works and how the subsidy works. And then on this last page, so this is James Heckman, and he cites research about early interventions needed for the disadvantaged, particularly preschool. He's also the author of a book called Giving Kids a Fair Chance with a focus on early intervention. And he states, the real question is how to use available funds wisely. The evidence supports the policy prescription, invest in the very young. And then our next steps is, as you heard, there's a couple that are not in pre-K. So our goal is to have universal pre-K, which just means everybody who wants it gets it. So that's our goal. And then the continued professional development. You heard Stephanie make reference to Faunus and Pinnell. So right in their PLC that they're now able to do for the first time. So they're meeting monthly together as a group, and they're rotating in the different elementary schools. So they're working on a book study called Literacy Beginnings by Faunus and Pinnell, and Matt Halpern is one of our literacy strategists who's working with them. So they're going to read, implement, reflect, come back, discuss. So that's really the best way to have professional development. It's ongoing. It's taking pieces of it, going into your lab, which is your classroom, and then coming back together to discuss and grow from there. So, and then we obviously have the everyday math, and they're using some components of Math Their Way. And Stephanie, you also referred to handwriting without tears. So we have some great next steps in place, and some wonderful pre-K teachers doing all of the work in the front line. So. And there is, from each of the schools, who's on the left, which school? Not the name, but Pownell. Pownell, and then the middle is? Moore Street, and then Durham. So
And
there
we
are
do that thumbs up, thumbs down thing right there, just so you know.
So these children are representing, thank you for supporting our pre-K program. And that concludes our pre-K workshop. Unless you have questions for any of the...
Just a real quick question. I know that kids have been going to the Laugh and Learn program. How is that impacted, or is that still an existing program? Or?
So, is it?
How about if we can speak?
Oh yeah, that would be great. So, which one of you would like to speak to?
Well, I can speak.
Will come up. Thanks, Will.
So it varies. In Durham, when we added pre-K, Laugh and Learn, which had been an opportunity during the day, no longer was because of space requirements. So Laugh and Learn in Durham now is a before school and after school opportunity, but not the preschool opportunity that it had been in the past because of space. Julie, did you want to speak to?
So Laugh and Learn still exists at Moore Street, and they
They have less students probably than they've had before, but they offset the days, much like, so because we're part-time, we were trying to work together to offer the offset days, so that if people needed full-time care. So they're still in our building for sure. So.
Do they align their curriculum with what your pre-Ks are doing?
Not exactly, because they offer under a different umbrella to us, but we're definitely working more closely together and having more conversations around trying to make things consistent. The Laugh and Learn at Moore Street are now eating in the lunchroom with us, and they're involved in our assemblies and things like that. And so we have been talking more closely with the pre-K teachers around the letter of the week. In the Moore Street program is also the same at Laugh and Learn, so for those students who are going back and forth, it's not confusing and things. So, yep. And all of those teachers, all of those Laugh and Learn pre-K teachers did the responsive classroom training this summer, so to have some of that consistency across the building as well.
Yeah.
So.
I just wanted to say, no, not a question. I just wanted to say, before retiring, this is what I did for a long time, and worked and helped the state of Delaware set up their system, and worked a little bit with Will and Stephanie as they were setting things up in Durham. And it's just extremely important, and I just want to say it's wonderful what you're all doing with all the young ones. It's just great.
And I want to be clear that my comment on the column, the row there, has nothing to do with what you guys are doing. I couldn't even imagine what you guys do every day and appreciate it infinitely. I have a tendency to pick out a number and try and figure out what it means, and it is in no way indicative of what I feel about the program. I think it's an amazing program. I mean, you go into the school and they're just like littler students. I mean, you see, they're just little, and they're going into gym and they're going into library. It's fantastic. So. Valley.
So when we move towards universal pre-K for everyone, is there going to be a space constraint? Because I remember last year the big discussion was around space and how we would accommodate all the students in our existing buildings. So are we thinking forward on how we can fit them all when they come to us?
I think that we can fit them at Moore Street. I think if we needed to add a whole new classroom at Pownell, that would be challenging. Is that right, Lisa? And we might have the same issue at Durham. But I think we could, it's interesting because I feel like you received two answers when we said, is there a waiting list? Because I know I was shaking my head no. Because we have a space at Moore Street right now, but it's just not fitting the needs how those families need it. So I think it might be able to offer universal pre-K, but it may not be in all three locations that we could offer it to everyone, but we could definitely look at offering it somewhere. And I think the other thing that's really important is for us to just, which I think we tried to do this year, was to really get the word out that it's time to go sign your kids up. And I know that some families waited, and we make the decision at some point around June if somebody's requesting from Freeport to go to Pownell or from Pownell to go to Durham. So it's really important for those families to sign up, so that if we have a slot in Durham, when people are signing up, we want it to go to Durham residents first. But at some point, we do give those slots away. So it'll be important around the communication, too.
So do we have a way to track that the upcoming cohort of pre-K students, how many there are in total, not just enroll, but who attend other pre-K programs? Because as the word gets out that we do have universal care for pre-kindergartners, I expect that we'll have a higher demand, and it would be nice to be able to plan ahead, knowing how many are available in totality, to try to
Well, I
think
think we
ahead
can
to
base
accommodate.
that partially. It's always a guess, but I mean, we can look at our kindergarten numbers, and I don't know that there's a drastic fluctuation from year to year. So that helps us to gauge.
I was surprised to hear that 75% of kindergartners in the district have gone to an RSU 5 pre-K program. I mean, that was just in Durham. Oh, that was just in Durham. Okay.
Sorry, Durham, that's the case. Dang it. In Durham, that was the case. Current kindergarten, 75% of them. But we anticipate, based on numbers, Valerie, from your question, that currently we anticipate that 75% of next year's kindergarten at Moore Street are currently in the pre-K. And about 80% of Pownall's are currently in the pre-K. And about 70, again, for us, 32 are full, but that's about generally 75% of it. And then the other piece, just along with what you were just discussing, is that Universal being a slot for every child or family who would choose to attend, because it's still a 2 or potentially 3-day program, some families will still opt for a 5-day program. And one of the pieces we found previously was that for some families, they would choose, if they work quite far away, those families sometimes would choose to have their child in a preschool type environment near where they work, so that that commute back and forth is actually with the child and not necessarily at some other daycare or childcare situation.
Don't go anywhere. Well, I have a question for you. Since you're already there. The 3rd day option in Freeport and Durham, is that determined with the screening in the spring, or is it more on the ground when you're like, okay, we need to get this kid in with some extra?
So initially it's determined by the screening in the spring. And it also is a way, you may have seen in the press recently that the state were discussing maybe a different model for child development services. But and partly because of their ability to get providers. So if we, for example, had 5 children who were requiring some speech and language support, those 5 children would be also invited on a Friday, and the CDS speech and language provider would come on the Friday. So there's a way of, it's also a way of then having the children who get those CDS services to receive those on that day, so they're not necessarily interrupting their other 2 days, but also help CDS to have a provider come for a day and be at another location on another day. So it's predominantly done in the spring. However, once the children have arrived and we start to get to know them better, it really looks like, boy, that we feel like a child would benefit from a slot on a Friday, there is space for that. So the Friday group is not as full, at least in Durham. I can't speak for Freeport, but yeah. So it's not maxed out, partly because we're trying to give those children some extra attention. But there's space there if a child we thought needed to offer the family a Friday option too.
Thanks.
So on Friday, there's a co-teaching model going on with our teachers and CDS bringing someone also?
So yes, potentially, but they don't work with the group. They'd work with an individual child at a time. So if that child was, as I mentioned, the speech example, the 2 teachers or the teacher and the ed tech would be working with the group of children, and the speech pathologist might be working with a child at a time.
Jen.
I just wanted to say, as someone who sent their kids to preschool because it wasn't an available option, that I think it's great that we offer a quality education to these pre-K kids, where a lot of these kids would not have been able to afford that prior to this. So I think that's a huge positive, and I don't see anything except for benefit coming out of a pre-K program.
Well, when you mention some families who might not be able to afford it, all the research about this stuff goes way, way back when they started Head Start. And one of the things they found is that the preschool programs have even more of an effect for kids from lower socioeconomic families.
So thanks for pointing that out. In your packet, there was some Hattie research, and you saw that I have 2 lines in there, and one is about pre-K students who are at-risk students. It's a much higher effect size than the rest of the population, and I think that just supports what you're saying, Candy.
Any other Questions, comments on pre-K? Great. Thank you, guys. Okay, class size.
Okay. Oh, so the years, Kate's question is what on the Hattie research you see different years. And so every couple of years, John Hattie looks at the research again because there have been new studies that have been done. And so he folds that in to the research and see if the effect sizes change with more studies that have been done. And so you can see with the pre-K for all students that the effect size is going down, and I think that's a really kind of interesting number to look at because it could be that I think across the whole United States you have more programs being implemented, and you don't know what the rigor is in those programs or how much they're curriculum driven, and I think that could be influencing the effect size on that.
It could be that there's just fewer samples that don't have pre-K anymore.
Could be. Okay, so so we've given you a lot of data over the past week in your packet around class size, and I've included one more sheet that you received in your packet tonight. It's on the orange because I keep just trying to get more succinct in my thinking in order for it to be easier for you to kind of wrap your minds around this kind of complex issue. So I want to just talk first of all about what does the statute say, and the statute itself can be a little bit confusing. You need to think about the statute talks about average, it talks about ratio, and at times it does talk about maximum limits. So there are really two maximums in looking at pre-K to 12. The statute's really clear about you can't have more than 16 students in a pre-K classroom, and with 16 you need a ratio of 1 to 8, so that's why all of our pre-K classrooms have an ed tech in them. So that's one thing that makes it difficult to get to universal pre-K, because if we really had just one more, you think, well, could we put that one kid in there? And we did have some discussion on the A team around that. You have to petition the state. I think with all of these, you should know that we can ask for a waiver, and the commissioner can weigh in on that and grant a waiver if he sees that there's a need around that. In this case, we decided not to petition, and we felt like it was important to stay to the 1 to 16 ratio. You also see that in grades 1 to 8, the statute says that we should not exceed 30 unless it's for classes such as band and chorus, and that the average class size should not exceed 25 to 1. So that's talking about you can have a class of 30, and then you can have a class of 20, and then you've achieved the average of 25. So that's what it's talking about when it talks about an average class size. When it talks about a ratio, as you see in kindergarten, 20 to 1, you can exceed that class size if you put an ed tech in there, because right now that's really addressing the ratio. And then at grades 9 to 12, they recommend a student-teacher ratio of 30 to 1. Then in your packet, I also tried to make a chart to simplify our comparison districts. We used the districts that were in...
What you just said, they
Yes.
recommend a maximum student-teacher ratio of 30 to 1, correct?
At 9 to 12?
Yeah.
Well, that's a ratio, yes, a ratio, 30 to 1, yes.
As a maximum.
As a maximum.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, the statute does not address any minimums. That's a good clarifying question, Lindsay. So then you look at the comparison districts, and we have 75, Cape Elizabeth, Yarmouth, Brunswick, Falmouth, and Gray New Gloucester, 15, and then 51. So both 15 and 51, they do not have policies. The other 5 districts do have policies. And from the chart that you're seeing, you can see that there are a lot of nuances in their policies. And so I tried to make the chart, but you just have to really read it critically, because you have things that, when you look at Falmouth, they did their whole policy around ratios, which I just explained. And then when you look at 75, they did theirs around averages. And then other districts tried to kind of create something with maximums. So you have to be just careful as you read that. I included the Hattie research just so, you know, you could have that as a comparison, that you're always looking for an effect size of 0.4 or greater when choosing interventions to increase student achievement. It does not mean the other ones aren't worthwhile. It's just, you know, you've heard me say that before. So I've included the Hattie research on that, and you can see that that has stayed pretty consistent over all of the different years that he's done his research at, and it comes out at about a 0.21. Then Valley had emailed a question around teacher loads, and I understand that because one of the districts did write their middle school policy looking at the caseloads for each teacher, and so I think that was a good question that you asked, and so I've tried to include that on this orange sheet. That you can see at the high school that our current teacher loads range from about 30 to 1, and that's for our theater and dance classes, to around 120 for Western Studies and Psychology. And then I've included the teacher loads at the middle school, currently at Durham. That's 427 students per unified arts teacher per trimester. And then in the core subjects, it's 74 to 99. At Freeport Middle School, it's about 100 to 120 per unified arts teacher. In the core subjects, it's about 55 to 112. And then I also, Jen, I think it was you that requested to see the current class sizes again. So we put that on another sheet for you for the last 2 years, where we did the data, where we broke it down per classroom. And so that's kind of what I've included in your snapshot. I've also, this is a very, I think, complex issue, and I would like Charlie to just talk a little bit from the principal's perspective at the high school about the complexity of scheduling at the high school, because you can see that I gave you a data point there under FYI that currently our class sizes at the high school range this semester from 2 in PE to 29, which is I think an English World Studies class.
Yeah, American Studies class.
American Studies, thank you.
Yep.
So Charlie.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, when talking about class sizes at the high school is in a pretty unique position because we have a lot of singleton classes. And what I mean by that is, like, we have a lot of elective classes for our upper level students, juniors and seniors mostly, that are offered during one period in the schedule, taught by one teacher during one period. And when a student signs up to take that class, the rest of that student's schedule is built around that class. And so if there are restrictions on class sizes, that could limit that student's choice to take that class or other classes that are built around that class in terms of that particular student's schedule. And I'd also say that at the high school, you know, we've worked very hard, and our guidance counselors are very good at kind of solving this complex puzzle that is scheduling there. But we've worked very hard at keeping class sizes to generally about 20, like averaging out about 20. And we feel pretty good about the class sizes and where they are. And if we we feel like if there are restrictions on class sizes, it would limit the flexibility that guidance counselors have in terms of creating those schedules around singleton classes. And we also worry about the effects on options for students because of all those singleton classes and the scheduling ripple effects around that. So that's kind of the picture at the high school of class sizes. Yeah.
I just want to say, because when you said 29 for American Studies, just from my own personal experience, there's 2 teachers in that class. So that, to make people feel better about it. I mean, I've been in those classes.
Yeah.
Like, it's
So that is a very unique kind of program at the school, too. It is a co-taught class that is as a U.S. history credit and an English credit combined. I actually used to teach that class. And so... it is. There's 29 kids, but there's 2 teachers. And that's only one of the American Studies sections. All the rest are much lower numbers. And again, the reason why that one particular section has so many kids in it is because of a lot of those kids, it's a junior level taught class. A lot of those kids can only fit American Studies in at that time because they're taking other singleton classes, if that makes sense.
That's a good clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good clarification.
Lindsay, okay. Valley.
So Charlie, I was under the impression that you had a 5-student minimum to run a class. Is that not correct?
That's a general rule, but sometimes if there's there are exceptions to that rule.
So how many classes do you currently run that are exceptions to the rule, that are the singleton classes that you're talking about?
1, maybe 2. I don't know that off the top of my head, but not many, not very many at all.
Can you really have a gym class with 2 people?
Yeah.
And that's within what you expect year in and year out. This is not an unusual year in terms of the number of classes with very, very few students, right? It's not unusual to have one or 2 classes like that, correct.
Do those tend to be either the really high-level AP classes where there's not huge people that can't even take them, or are they more specialized electives?
Well, this year, in this case, it is a very high-level class. It's a high-level math class that these 2 students have taken every other math option at the school, and they're taking this as kind of an extension of their math.
So, Charlie, this is also the PE class.
Yeah, and the PE. Okay,
right.
Yeah, those are the 2. Yeah.
So I think it's like weight training with the new weight room.
With the new weight, yeah, exactly.
So I think we're trying to build that program, right? So it just started.
Right. Yeah, it's a new program. But the math one I was referring to is this linear algebra class that these 2 students who have taken every other math class at the school are now in. They're very high level math. Yeah.
So we also. Of the other principals, Emily Grimm has agreed to kind of just talk about kind of the K-8 perspective around class size. And then, of course, they'll all be available for questions.
So as I was thinking about this topic over the last several days and really the last several months, one of the things I was thinking about is what brought me to RSU 5. So I'm a future parent and obviously an employee as well, and I was thinking just about how much our teachers prioritize knowing their kids and how the size, I think, of our community is really ideal for being responsive to what their needs are. And the reason I mention that is because I think it's really important that if we're considering a policy about class size, that it allows for a level of fluidity that's responsive. This year at Mass Landing, we've welcomed 27 new kids, and of course, initially there were some reactions about like, whoa, what's going to happen? And of course, you're getting kids who you don't necessarily have a ton of history on, so you don't know what their needs might be behaviorally or from a learning perspective. But I think I mentioned that because I think it's important not to just focus on the number of heads in the room. So our 4th grades, for example, this year are at 22. One of those teachers last year had 17. If she were standing, she's a longtime veteran, if she were standing here tonight, she would have said last year was the hardest year of her career with 17. And so I think what I hope that you consider as you talk about this issue is ensuring that we have flexibility for teachers to provide input to administrators and administrators to provide input to Becky and to the board so that we can ensure that whatever our staffing model is, it responds to the needs of those kids in that moment. Then I called Becky in August when my fourth grades were at 22, and I said, here's what I'm thinking. These are kind of some of the challenges I anticipate. Here are some ways we've been proactive, and let's come up with a plan A and B once we meet the kids. And I think it's just really important to preserve that level of responsiveness in any policy. And the reason I think administrators are well positioned to provide those recommendations is because we also understand all the ripple effects that a cap can put on. So Charlie alluded to some of those. But in my building, for example, right now with 4 sections, it enables me to provide teachers collaborative planning time every week together. If I go to 5 sections, that changes. I can't provide embedded time without pulling a teacher from instructional time. And certainly that's not a singular driver, but it's an example of the many pieces that go into us considering what staffing model works best, whether it's a class with ed tech support, whether it's breaking 4 sections into 5 sections. But I just think this issue has so many pieces that play into it, and our teachers and administrators are really well positioned to provide recommendations that work for their building in a given context, whether it's getting 27 new kids in by the end of August, or whether it's wanting to ensure we can offer linear algebra to students. So I just encourage you to ensure that there's flexibility in whatever you might consider, and that we're able to do what I think we do best, which is to be really responsive to the kids we have in that year in each classroom. So that's all I've got. Beth. Yeah.
So when you said you got 27 new students, was that kids that have never been in RSU 5 and are through the 3 grades? 25
of the 27 are students that are new to RSU 5. Wow. 2 others were from other buildings.
Over the 3 grades, all 3.
Thankfully, spread evenly over all 3 grades, yes.
Any other questions for Emily while she's up here? Okay.
So that kind of concludes what we're presenting, and now I think it's really up for you to discuss. I think the question you need to grapple with is, do you want a written policy in RSU 5? And then if you do, to give some guidelines. And I think when you look at other policies, when you look at the statute, I guess I would reiterate what Emily is saying. Everybody who is writing the statutes and their policies, that you can see that they have a lot of flexibility in them.
Naomi.
So in looking at the comparison districts, I think we're in such a unique situation with Durham and Pownell. If we can't expand our pre-K, we certainly can't. If we put ourselves in a box, we're risking, what do you do if you don't have the room?
Non-compliance with our own policy?
Exactly, which we've done before.
Wait.
Right, but I think we have to be really, really careful. If we're going to go forward with that, I think we have to have a really broad range. And some of these, they go up to 25, I think is the max. That's only 5 away from what the state says. So it's not that far off. So that's my 2 cents.
Lindsay.
I appreciate being able to see all this information and all the policies that exist for the communities around us. It's all super helpful, so thank you so much for providing that. I think at the outset, there's a lot to take in, but I would favor, our district having a written policy that does include the flexibility that our administrators are talking about. And I feel like some of the example policies did have flexibility in there. I don't know if any of them are perfect, and I would just say, let's do this one or let's do that one. But one of the things that I appreciated when I was reading them was sort of a level of transparency up through board level when there were suggested aberrations from the policy, just because over my time experiencing life in the district, there have been very different levels of transparency depending on who's the superintendent, administrator, whatever. And I just feel like it's really healthy for there to be that transparency there, with the necessary flexibilities, just so that there's things aren't happening without people knowing, and then then it just seems to be a healthy system that way.
Checks and balances.
Yeah. So I guess those are my first thoughts.
I would like to echo what Lindsay just said. I think we do need that kind of clarity, especially towards the community, because if we don't provide that clarity, then they are sitting confused, wondering what's the top limit and what's the minimum here. And I also wanted to say that I did appreciate having all of these policies, and there were some of them that pointed out the fact that this is the minimum or the maximum, but if the administrator should need an exception, then by all means that route is open, and that administrator can approach the superintendent of the board, so that there can be a discussion for any particular situation about what can or cannot be done. So there wouldn't be at any point a number that's set in stone that can never be altered. So that's just my comment on the policies and the structure. I did appreciate having all of this research, so thank you so much. And especially to me, it was helpful to see how the structure of the policy works, whether it's ratios or the average or the maximum. Where I didn't find the chart all that helpful was in the numbers themselves, or what the minimum or maximum is for each one of these districts. Because each district has a unique situation and a unique community. And also when I look at these numbers, I can see what the maximum may be, but I don't know how much additional support there is in the classroom, or other supports that the teachers need to be able to manage whatever caseload they have written into this policy. So for example, in Falmouth, I have a friend who teaches there, teaching first grade, and there they have an EdTech that is there every day for half a day. So that's a considerable amount of help, because the EdTechs are there doing everything from doing individual check-ins with the different students who need the additional support to small group discussion and delivering instruction. So having those 3 hours on a daily basis is tremendous. So that teacher can probably manage more kids than what our Moore Street teachers in first grade can manage with only 30 to 40 minutes of EdTech help per day. So it may seem very clear cut, but it's actually a lot more complex that these numbers show. And the other reason that I thought the numbers were not all that helpful is because we have a very unique district, and we have a community that feels very strongly about class sizes, as we saw last year. So when I look at these numbers, I just don't see that a lot of these numbers would work for our community in particular, because we value the whole child, education, and a lot of support, emotional and social, and not just academic. So there are a lot of factors that come into play that are not reflective of our community and why people choose us to come here, and the values that we hold dear, which are strong relationships between the teachers and the kids, and very intimate settings to deliver personalized instruction and individualized attention. So moving forward, I am in favor of having a policy that is flexible and that provides an opening for any kind of discussion that may be necessary for any kind of situation. But I would like to request that if we go forward with a policy, that we have a public hearing or something formal that invites community members to come share with us what their expectations and what their values are and what it is that they would like to see in this policy, because this discussion doesn't end here, it just starts here. But really, I would like to be very responsive to what parents and community want out of our schools.
Lindsay.
Yeah, that brings up, and something that I've been thinking about on this topic, and that's that we as board members and administrators and teachers, we all talk about this stuff a lot, and we, have, research shared with us and whatnot. And parents don't typically have those discussions, and I would hope that, I don't know, some way there would be a way to share, say there were some sort of like information night, where we shared some instructional perspective on, what different ways to think about the topic for people to ponder, instead of just, I don't know, there just seemed to be a gap like when we had the public comment, there was a gap between like what was shared with the board and what the public was shared with the public. Or maybe it was shared. I mean, they're always available, but I just feel like.
Yeah, Jen.
Yeah, we're live streaming. It should all be solved.
So I actually look at it a little bit differently, as far as I have a different view on parent and community input into things like class size. I disagree that communities and parents should be deciding those types of things. So in saying that, I actually think a policy would help there be equality among each school, and so there wouldn't be situations where there could be, we want, this school to have a smaller class, but this school's class is fine at this size. I just worry that we have a lot of input that doesn't come from a place where people have information. It comes from just kind of a personal response of, I want my kid in a smaller class. So I'm kind of on the other side of that with the community and parent input.
Candy.
I certainly would be open to us having a policy, as long as it wasn't, you can do this and one child outside of it doesn't work kind of thing. But I would be very interested in having the administrators and teachers, whatever, give us some input on this, rather than, us sitting around the table making that decision. I think, however we wanted to organize that, whether, you had some talks in each school, or the administrators together, or a team with teachers and administrators to have them give us some input about what they thought class size ought to be.
Beth?
Thank you. I pretty much so agree with what Jen said. I think the problem of having like a open session with community members and parents is they don't have all the information. All the information that we look at and we discuss at our meetings is available if someone wants to go find it. Or, they could call someone and, be directed to where it is. But I think the problem, if you're inviting community members in and parents in, is they're going to be talking from their perspective as a parent for that student. My kid's in 4th grade. I don't want a large class in 4th grade, where like when we had our boardsmanship workshop, we were kind of discussing, where as a board member we have to reflect on the whole thing, where, people don't have to do that when they come here. And I think they speak from their heart and from their direct family more than they would from all the knowledge that we've gained doing the workshops and getting the information. If we do a policy, to me, policy and flexible don't go together. I'm like, you can. Yeah, I mean, you can, and that's, if there's going to be a policy, I want it to be very flexible, because we really, there are so many different situations. Every class, every school has a different situation, so we have to be able to trust in our administrators and teachers that we can make it work for them, instead of saying, you can't have more than 22 kids no matter what. So I think, it has to be very flexible to, in order to work in this district.
I think as a board, we have to take all stakeholders, input, and I think you got to invite it in, and then you have all the information you can get, and you make your decision. So I appreciate hearing the public's comment. Also, it's important to know when people are not happy. Because there are things that can be done, and you don't want people leaving the district because class sizes are too big and you're blindsided. I hear that is a reason why people leave school districts in general. I mean, I hear it as a parent. There were 25 kids in the kindergarten class, or whatever, and it is something that people are passionate about. So I think it's important to have channels of communication going both ways. And yeah, I agree with, there is that fine line, like, when is a policy so flexible that you might as well not have it? Like, why is it worth the effort to lay something out if, it's kind of like hard to tell. But I liked one of them, or actually a couple of them. It seemed very simple. It was like, every October or something, there's a point in the board schedule where anything that was outside of what's listed in the policy just gets shared at the board meeting or something. It's sort of a check, and I was like, oh, that sounds so doable, to have these check-in moments that are part of it, and it's a normal part of the procedure, and it's just, it's A-okay to go outside, but it's just good to know when it's happening and what the circumstances are. So yeah, I think that there is a sweet spot, that it's beneficial. I think what you were talking about, just like, or at least what you were saying, was making me think that it's a policy can be a very helpful unifying document that avoids a lot of individual flare-ups. If there is some work to create a general understanding of what we're trying to achieve, that can help avoid tense, like hotspot discussions, possibly.
Jeremy.
Yeah, definitely. By no means was the intent that any of us had was to limit the educational puzzles that you guys are putting together out there as the schedule gets put together. Definitely was not the intent, I don't think, of anybody here for that. I definitely do, though, favor a policy that does act as a guideline, and I think that on the back page of this, the pink sheets, Falmouth seems really reasonable in terms of the language that they throw in there, and I do like that the very first paragraph, it says that they want to provide class sizes that are well within the suggested maximum limit set by the state. Like that they're saying, they are saying that, generally smaller class sizes are better. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's what they're sort of suggesting as a guideline there, and saying stay below that 25 number. But there is quite a bit of flexibility underneath that. So that it is a guideline. That's what a good policy is. It's a guideline about what do we want to do. I think that's what caused a lot of the dissension last spring, was we didn't know what we were looking for, and so we were all kind of some were pissed off at live streaming at
we don't have a dump button, Jeremy.
I need a cough button. So we had that situation where we didn't know what we were looking for in a lot of ways, and that caused some of the problems. So I think a policy would be a very good place to act as our roadmap, as our guideline for that. I was a little concerned, though, about what happened in the spring, is that it didn't seem like all of our administrators were fully listened to in terms of numbers, specific numbers there. And I want to, at least we'd have the policy then to be able to speak to those concerns. So, and I do think that our district is known for smaller class sizes. That's why I know 6 years ago when I was out shopping for school districts, that was a major reason why, RSU was the choice. So those are my thoughts.
Naomi.
So I'm trying to wrap my brain about, you were talking about equity and having a broad policy and coming to the board for exceptions. So then if you take Pownell or Durham, where you're always going, or not always, but you're going to have exceptions a lot of the time, then where's the equity in that? We're just back to what we've been doing. So I don't know how broad do you have to make it?
Well, we don't have a policy, so how are there exceptions?
But she's saying if we were to put one of these policies in place, there's likely always going to be an exception.
But why? We don't.
Because we don't have room to add a class. So if there's always an exception, then I don't see the equity, I guess. That's I'm just having a hard time seeing how it works.
And I think, what I think I'm hearing from the majority of folks that have spoken is I don't think I've heard anybody say that they are not in favor of us doing a policy, right? You might disagree on what you want that policy to say at this point, and that'll be the work of the policy committee to start. And I think, what we're hearing is we'd love to hear stakeholders, whether it's teachers, whether it's parents, whether it's community members. I really like Lindsay's idea of, more of a two-way conversation with the community. Let's try and share some of the other information and impact of, because I think all else being equal, I don't think anybody would say, I want to have bigger class sizes, right? But when you understand the ramifications and what it means, and, are you willing to forego, prep time with your teachers to collaborate to do that, is that, some of those things not everybody thinks about when they say, yeah, I'd love to have smaller class sizes, I think if we can have sort of that two-way conversation where we're providing all that information and we're also collecting feedback, and Beth's point is we at the end of the day create the policy, right? And that doesn't mean we can't solicit input from all the different stakeholders and take it all in, and then we come up with a policy that we feel as a board is appropriate for our district. I think I don't want to speak for someone who doesn't believe we want a policy, but my sense is we've got some pretty good consensus that we'd like to see a policy move forward.
Picturing it if we want small class sizes, ideally in the younger grades. So a lot of these are 16 to 20. I mean, the highest was 22. That's hard in some of our communities to do that. So I'm just saying, so then there's always an exception because we don't have room to do anything else. So I'm just having a hard time visualizing how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that'll be something we have to, and that's Naomi, so she's already ahead of the game.
Yeah, like Naomi, sees when you're trying to work through the policies how tangled it can get. Right. I think you feel that more viscerally than I do because I'm not typically in that meeting.
Right. See, law of unintended consequences, right?
Right. And they say broad is better. I mean, that's what we try to do. It's just how broad do you get to be able to
make it work?
To make it work, or even make it worthwhile putting in the time.
Yeah.
Just a question. Oh, sorry. And that is like with the current numbers, where would the exceptions be needed if we said 22? I mean, if as a recommended guideline or something. I just don't.
Well, I don't know about right now what's there. But I know my son's class from first grade up was over 22 every year. I think Kate's son has been there's larger class, the bubble classes that come through.
Sure.
That's they always come.
Yep.
Yeah, and on the other end, you have the really small classes too. So maybe for the classes that are going to be the size that they are, give and take a little bit, you don't have to come and have that discussion every year. It's probably in cases where, for example, you have 27 unexpected kids coming and the class sizes, increase considerably over a 2-month period of time, then that's the time to have the conversation and consider that an exception and not the cases that are happening on a regular basis every year.
But I think the point about equity is, so we just say, sorry, class of Naomi's kid, you got stuck with the big class for 5 years. Is that equity? I don't know. Is there anything we can do about it? I don't know that either,
Isn't that the situation where, and Becky, you talked about this last year with the 8th grade math situation, where it's not as much class size, but the teacher ratio. You had said something about with that 8th grade class, if we find, a few weeks into the year that there's some issues in that class, I will put support in that class. That's another option. It's not just about cap it at 20 kids. You can cap it at 20, but it may be better to cap it at 25 and have support in that class versus having just one teacher with 20.
Yes, I think it's very complex, and to me, it's not as easy as saying, so we want all class sizes 22 or below. When the administrative team is really looking and grappling and getting deeper into the data and saying, what we really need this year in the budget is, more tier 2 interventions, and we think that, adding 3 ed techs would be much more productive to student achievement in RSU 5 than having 24 kids at Pownell in a classroom. I mean, that's the flexibility that I think is needed in a policy, to rely on your administrative team, because I agree with Jeremy that RSU 5 is known for small class sizes, but we also want to improve our student achievement, and there will always be trade-offs, and I think that's what makes this really not easy, for all the reasons that you're all talking about. All very valid points.
I like the targets. There's sort of, and a couple of them have it like target size or optimal size, and then they have a max, right? So we're really shooting for sort of those optimal sizes, with the understanding that occasionally there's things beyond our control. So, Valerie.
Yeah, and I also want to ensure that there isn't a creep up that happens with class sizes, because we always want to add a new service that we need. So a new service that we need shouldn't always be traded for larger classrooms, because we do have many, many families who have chosen to come here because of class sizes. It's not just retaining the families that we have, it's also honoring the choice of the families who come here because we offer smaller class sizes. And as far as adding ed techs, yeah, in certain cases, sure. But if you talk to teachers, most likely I know they will say they prefer to have a smaller class of their own than having a larger class and other adults helping in the classroom, because it's easier to build a good, healthy community within the classroom when you don't have too many kids, and even having the ed tech won't give you that community. So I mean, there are definitely trade-offs that may happen from time to time, but my concern is that if we don't have some kind of guideline, the trade-offs will become the norm, and all of a sudden we'll have larger class sizes than we want, or larger class sizes than our community values and expects us to have. And not to say that the community will dictate what the target is or the maximum or minimum, but that they're a really important voice in this discussion, and they're the people who send their kids here, and they're the people who pay the bill, so they definitely should be included in the conversation. And they actually do their homework too. They know what they're talking about.
Okay. So I guess our next step is to hand this off to the policy.
Naomi.
The policy committee, because you guys don't have a lot on your plate.
It seems unfair.
I think that's where it should start. I mean, it's a policy. It should start with the policy subcommittee.
Yeah. Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Since we're trying to involve
Your mic on?
Oh, it is on. Since
Okay.
I really like the idea of involving not just board members in that discussion. So is the policy committee the right place to create a draft of that? Or is there some mechanism that could have like an administrator, teacher, parent, this kind of group of various stakeholders?
Becky?
Becky's dancing.
I would encourage you to start with the policy committee, and then when they just get a very rough draft, that we seek the input then and have something that people can react to, rather than just to have an open forum where people are coming up and saying, I want the maximum or minimum, or I want the ratio. I just think it's better to give people something to react to.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the policy subcommittee, how they generally work is when they're dealing with whatever the policy is, they're reaching out to the stakeholders of that anyway. So they're going to reach out to the administrators, I would imagine, when they're starting that process. And we can certainly expand upon that if we want to include, more stakeholders. But I think they're the place to start.
Now, shouldn't we be at least giving them some guidance in terms of, do we want a target size? Do we want maximum, minimum? Do you want to write it in terms of ratios, or do we just leave a blank slate for you guys to just start?
So I see this as a multiple step. It may take more than 2 readings. And knowing this word, so I'd let them. I mean, they've heard everything that everybody has said tonight, and I would let them take a stab at it. And I just think, even for the board, it's easier to react to something than to go around and poll everybody about whether they want a ratio, a average, a maximum, a minimum. But that would be my recommendation.
Kate. Were you just putting your hand up to volunteer? No, just kidding.
I think I would also recommend, to Naomi's point, a possible way to approach trying to wrap your head around this idea of there always being an exception at Pownell or Durham to the policy. I'm sure that Will or Lisa would be willing to tell you what they would do if they had a class of 30 kids or 25. Like, they know when they're going to reach a point where something must be done and what that threshold would be, because if our district does continue to grow as it has been, we're going to reach that point. And so we need to be able to plan for when that time comes, and if that's going to be truly like something, we can't just be like, well, there's nothing we can do, so we don't have an extra classroom. We need to have a plan in place for what we're going to do in that case. And so I think there may be a more broader discussion about what has to happen down the line if we ever reach that threshold. So that's my 2 cents.
And yeah, I mean, as far as like class sizes, they always vary anyhow. We're not always increasing. 1 year, there's like a really small class or something. So, it always does fluctuate. If you look at the number of, students in classes, some of them are a lot lower than others, and that's just, and then unfortunately it happens in Pownell and Durham more because they can't have 2 or 3 classes or something, but, yeah. But yeah, look at 4th grade in Pownell has 12 and 5th grade has 20. I mean, that's a huge difference. And then, as the administrators have said, it all depends what students those are. You could have a class of 12 that could be really hard, and a class of 20 that's really easy. Well, nothing's easy teaching. Sorry.
And there have been some creative approaches to doing like a split grade. There are things that can be done, and so at what point do we consider that as an option? It seems in general this district is comfortable with anything less than 25, and I don't think we've had to reach the 25 point yet at Durham or Pownell, and I think 23, 24 was the max we were looking at Freeport. So it's kind of like stretching your imagination to something that hasn't actually occurred yet, which is that, okay, but what if it starts ticking up to the 26, 27, above that 25 mark? Like, what is the comfort level there, and how would you be able to deal with that? And if it's the adding support in the classroom, if that's the solution, then the policy needs to address that, like I think Yarmouth does, maybe. Or
one of them has like a
Brunswick or
half
something.
teacher,
Yeah.
half time ratio, or yeah. Valerie?
So process-wise, at what time do we include the feedback from the community, from just whoever wants to speak to this, teachers, administrators? I mean, the administrators will be included while the policy is being drafted, but I think we need to have a formal way of including the voice of the community, and I want to know when and how we will do that.
So I guess my recommendation would be for them to put out a draft to make sure that we widely circulate when the policy committee is meeting and what they're working on, but then, do it at a board meeting, I would think. Or we could do something like we're doing with the Dine and Discuss. We might do a 6 to 6:30. But I think that's where we're going to get the most people to come to already kind of publicized meeting. But I still think we need some kind of draft it might be the very first draft where we want to have them reacting to something.
Yep. Okay. Public comment? Anybody want to talk about it now?
Hi, my name is Maddie Vertenten. I'm a Freeport resident and a parent in the community, and maybe one day I'll be an elected official. Who knows? But I feel like there's a huge opportunity here with this to really get in front of the budget process. Specifically by including the community. And I was a little dismayed. It sounded a little dismissive of the community members at some points in the discussion today, and I would caution the board against that. I think perhaps that might be coming from the way the process seems to have worked in past. It's a lot of work on the part of all the administrators and the board to come up with a budget that we know is going to be contentious. And so you have people enlist the voices in the community to come in and rally for a specific outcome. And that's got to be really frustrating for the board, I can only imagine. But in putting a policy in place, flexible, and in communicating proactively, what are all the potential positive impacts? What are the potential adverse impacts, everything around class size, instructional hours, all the nitty-gritty staffing implications that these people are all really familiar with. Educate the public about that, and not just in a half-hour forum, not just in a meet and greet, but putting together some kind of scorecard, some kind of really proactive educational material for the community, for the parents, that can be distributed by the administrators, would be really, really helpful to having a really thoughtful discussion with input from the community that hopefully then makes the budget process, not just this year, but every year from here on out, just a lot less contentious. I know that sounds like really positive thinking, but that's how I operate. And I think it's a real opportunity also, transparency was mentioned here tonight, for the board to appear to be far more transparent and open and communicative with the community. So please bear that in mind. I'm sure that means a lot of work hours putting something like that together, but I know, having been here last spring and having a daughter in the 8th grade class, and sort of seen how that whole thing worked, there's a lot of opportunity to proactively keep that kind of situation from happening in future. Hope that was clear. Thanks.
Thanks, Maddie. Okay. This is definitely a record for this year. 8:38, we would take a motion to adjourn. Sarah, second? Kate? All those in favor? You guys can't motion from the floor, sorry. Thank you.
It's a birthday. Happy birthday.
Yes, there you